Hello everybody and welcome to the Enboarder and Xref webinar on maintaining a positive employer brand. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sarah, the Marketing Director from Enboarder, and I'm here with our very own Director of People and Experience, Carly Herbert, Chris Murphy, the APAC Sales Director for Xref, and our superstar guest, Lee Robinson, the Group Recruitment Manager from Michael Hill. So before we get into it, let's just start with some quick introductions around the table. Carly, why don't you kick off and give us a quick overview of who you are and what you do?
Good morning, everybody. I've been with Enboarder since the beginning, so I've had the luxury of being able to be on both sides of the fence, having worked in the Head of Customer Success role for 3 years, and now heading up People and Culture, or People and Experience, and so have had the pleasure of working with Lee since the beginning. So that's me. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name is Chris. I'm the Sales Director for Xref in the APAC region. My background is 10 years recruitment before moving across to drive our growth within the APAC region. That's it.
And Lee?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, my name's Lee Robinson, obviously, as the title slide suggests. I'm the Group Recruitment Manager for Michael Hill. So I've got accountability for recruitment in the 3 countries which we currently operate. For those of you who don't know us, we're a retail jeweler with a presence in Australia, New Zealand and Canada. We've got approximately 2,500 employees across those 3 countries. We've got approximately 300 people in our head office, which is based here in Brisbane. I've got a team of 8 based in those 3 countries, so collectively we service the needs of both retail and head office. We obviously employ a number of different employee types. So we've obviously got the bulk of our workforce is retail. We've got head office roles, which are all the things you would expect. You know, IT, finance, marketing, manufacturing, distribution, HR, etc. We hire part-time, full-time, and we also hire casual. So we're actually pretty much right in the middle of our Christmas casual hiring season. So we're onboarding approximately 1,300 casuals in the course of 6 weeks in those 3 countries. And that's me.
Great, thanks, Lee. So I'll just give a quick rundown on what we'd like to cover. We do have a fair amount to cover, and we're going to try and make it quite interactive. So hope you don't mind, Lee, but we'll throw some questions at you as we go through it. So also conscious that we may run over the 30 minutes, guys, but we will be a little bit conscious of time. So in terms of what we'd like to cover, we'll start with engagement and employer branding, using tech to prevent a disconnect, the unique challenges of retail hiring, a Q&A session with Lee, and we'll open that up to anyone that's on the webinar. And then we'll touch on using tech for bulk hiring ease, engaging short-term hires, and I suppose a quick sign off from ourselves and Enboarder. And that's pretty much it. So I might kick things off if that's okay. So I suppose the first topic is engagement and employer branding. So I suppose it's good to start with what is an employer brand. And I was having a bit of a discussion with Carly about this actually prior to the webinar. And I suppose quite simply, you know, your employer brand is the representation of your organization to both consumers and employees. And I suppose it's really important that that's a true reflection of your organization, because they're very much one of the same, the consumer and employee experience. Carly, you had a nice customer example, I suppose, that kind of exemplifies that. Do you mind touching on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's topical and becoming more and more realised that in order for your consumer or your customer to really get the best out of you, that you need to hire to that. So the EVP and EVP are becoming more and more aligned. And the example of one of our customers is ING. They've actually, over the last So 3 years now since we first started and talked to them as a potential customer, have spent a lot of time and money and got a whole team together that specifically look at how to make their practices more synonymous with the customer experience that they've created. So years ago, they went through this whole process of digitizing and making more futuristic the digital and online journey of their customer, being that they're an online bank. And then they kind of turned around and realized that their internal processes for their staff and the way that they did things was so bureaucratic and antiquated, and that wasn't allowing their staff to deliver the best experience in line with what they wanted their customers to have. So they're now looking at how do we make them align, and introducing a lot of technology and really modernizing the way that their staff do things, but it also means that they need to hire to those practices as well. So that's opened up a big amount of activity for them, but it makes them a great customer for us. So
it's a great example. And I think, you know, the thing that we need to be consciously aware of here is that, you know, employer branding is obviously quite topical at the minute, but I think we need to realize that employer branding isn't just our, you know, kind of EVP or website or marketing collateral. It's actually, I suppose, how we conduct ourselves, and particularly through the recruitment and onboarding process, because that's often a first impression, and it's definitely a lasting impression for employees. Lee, if I can just bring you in, why is your employer brand so important?
I mean, for a whole bunch of reasons, all of which, you know, you probably both touched on there. But I guess for us, because we operate in 3 countries, there's the competition in each of those markets is very different, but there is increasing competition. So in Australia, for example, you've got a lot of international retailers coming into the market. In Canada, you've got the presence of, you know, USA just south of the border, and there's, you know, some of the world's largest retailers based in that geography. So, you know, they're obviously all looking for a slice of the action. And then New Zealand is unique in itself. You know, you don't, everybody sees that as a unique opportunity. So, you know, everybody's trying to have a crack at that market. It's an industry, or our particular industry, it's quite high turnover. So trying to elevate your brand above that is really critical for us. So trying to, you know, make that experience a positive one. It doesn't matter when people join us, you know, what stage of their life they are at. We want them to be able to anchor themselves to the messages of what our brand is. You know, I think the other thing, because we're a retail sales business, you know, it's actually painting an authentic view of what the job is. You know, it's a sales role, and that's not for the bulk of our retail stores. It is. So painting an authentic view of what that looks like, the challenges associated with that, and it's not always all about the, you know, the bright shiny things of, you know, loving diamonds and all of those things. It's actually about how you're connecting with somebody. So trying to paint that in an authentic way. And we would much rather people, I guess, opt out of our process knowing that than continue and then drop out once they've started with us because they didn't actually realize what it was like. So there's a few challenges there. I mean, probably the thing we're all experiencing in our lives right now is people purchase differently. So how people engage in a brand, particularly from a retail perspective, they're not always going into a store to engage with that brand. It's online. It's, you know, it's through all the social channels. It's through different media. And so trying to connect to people who might not physically actually ever step foot into one of your stores is a challenge as well.
Great. Thanks for giving us a good, I suppose, kind of practical overview of that. Have you guys, I suppose, ever had issues maybe in the past with, I suppose, maybe the image not marrying up to reality, or what's your experience or opinion, if you'd like, on creating a disconnect between the employer brand versus reality?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You know, I think a lot of organizations, and to be honest, you know, ourselves included, you paint a view of the business, you articulate that to the market. It's great to work here. And when people arrive and they start working here, they actually say, well, you know what, it's not that. So right now, actually, this week we kicked off an activity to actually unpack that a lot more. So why do people like working for us? What are the triggers? What do they want to engage with their brand? And then we're going to rework that into our messaging to the market. I think, a lot of businesses are put out there how good it is to work, and it's not always that. So, and we've been guilty of that in the past ourselves.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? I've actually, I suppose, more through my recruitment career, I've had the benefit of working for some great brands and recruiting for them. And what was quite surprising is, some of them from I suppose a macro brand level are exceptional, but their level of attrition is really, really high. And kind of looking at that, a lot of it is because they don't maybe articulate, the hard work maybe that's required in a startup, for example. So I think it's really important not just to kind of sell the good stuff, but just to explain that, there is the realities of joining a new employer. You got to be prepared for whatever dynamic it is, because I suppose the old saying of kind of horses for courses is very, very true. If we can also give an overview of I suppose an average day in the organization, we're more likely to attract the right people, and for them people to be a good fit for the organization. So I suppose that kind of moves us on nicely to utilizing tech to prevent a disconnect. So definitely one of the challenges that I hear about often is, HR and recruitment teams in particular, they certainly have a will to ensure there's a positive employer brand and a positive employee experience, but it can be hard because of resource constraints, tech constraints, and just a number of conflicting priorities. Carly, what's your, I suppose, kind of experience from a customer perspective in terms of preventing a disconnect and using tech?
So I actually have an example where it highlighted to us the issues in a number of ways, especially between that handover in a really large organisation, between the recruitment team and then the work that goes on in the background, in particular with reference checking in this case. So we did a pilot with Coca-Cola in the US, and we did a lot, I guess, because of the brand that was a potential client for us, a lot of work in really building the workflow to them to great detail to their processes, rather than it being purely about engagement, just to optimize and show them how far Enboarder could help them. And one of the things that we really found was disconnected was around this reference checking. And in their case, a lot of people do not pass reference checking, which means they then don't start their role. But because you can have onboarding activities being managed by some other part of the business, what we found was that people will continue to receive information that then became irrelevant to them because they actually weren't going to start their job. So in utilising the tech, it enabled them to risk mitigate that particular topic where you have such large organisations where people cannot talk to each other manually all the time and keep on top of that. But it actually helped us as a company better improve and create some enhancements that would allow other customers to do that better in the future, because it is such a variable part of the recruitment process that makes it difficult to automate through a typical workflow scenario. So it highlighted to us how important this can be to experience with the company and how they work together as well.
For sure. And I suppose that kind of leads us on nicely to, I suppose, data and how we can use data to inform future processes. Lee, if I can just bring you in again, in your experience, how have you used, I suppose, data to help improve that employee and candidate experience?
I guess these days there's so much data in a business. It's really trying to determine what's relevant for you and what you're trying to do. I mean, we try and use some simple things. It sounds obvious, and a lot of businesses look at this. To employee turnover. So we look at it. My recruiters and myself, we look at it monthly. So we look at the candidates that they've hired in the first 3 months. Are they still with us? Have they left? If they've left, why? We then roll that out to 6, 9, and 12 months because we know that the experience in store determines whether an employee stays or goes, or certainly a large contributing factor too. So we certainly pay close attention to those numbers, and we look at it by country, by region, by store manager, because we know that if we've got issues, and we can see, we report on a monthly, so we pick it up pretty quickly. We're able to identify which stores, which regions, we might have some problems in. We might be turning more people over than we should, because that then starts to impact on our ability to recruit into those markets. But also there's also a reputational damage if you're working in a bricks and mortar store and or you're a customer and you walk past a particular store, and every time you walk past, there's a whole fresh set of faces in there. You can start to draw some inferences on that. So we're quite aware of that. So we use turnover to look at that. We also do pulse checks. Recruiters will make phone calls in the first 4 weeks with their hires to touch base with them to see how they're traveling. It's also a great opportunity to plug the employee referral program to get more referrals as a nice little side note, but it also can give us a sense for what's happening. And, a classic or a real example of how that came or how we benefited from that. We were finding that in some of our regions, when the recruiters were checking in with their candidates, the candidates weren't getting the rostered time off that they should have been to complete their online training. So they were being asked to do it in their own time, and that's not a company expectation. So we were able to pick up on that pretty quickly. So we're able to pull the data on that. We use this as a plug, obviously, for Enboarder. We use Enboarder for all of our head office hires currently, and some of our retail. We're able to poll all of our new starters, and we can see how they're traveling, what their first month has been like. So we then feed that data back to the hiring manager's group exec, so we can start actually narrowing in on why people want to work for us, what their experience was like. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it indifferent? So there's a few things, but I suppose it's really just isolating what's important to you, and then start to look at that information, and then you can focus in on that. We also look at exit surveys. Most organizations obviously do it. We use Enboarder to do, we're shortly about to use Enboarder to do pulse checks. So as soon as we're advised, we'll contact that employee to get some real insight. Often, certainly what happened in our business prior to now was you get a list of the employees who left in the previous month or were about to leave. You'd send them a survey. Some people got it before they left. Some people didn't. Some people completed. Some people, and we really wanted to get a better handle quickly. So we're about to kick that off as well, so we can actually start acting on the information and get some insight from that.
No, great. And it sounds like, I suppose, a variety of HR tools can help in terms of, one, collecting that data through the, I suppose, ongoing experience, but also then making that data actionable, because that's often the challenge. I think, particularly as organizations get larger and more complex, they probably have more data than they can shake a stick at, but it's how do you actually digest that data and make it actionable. So it sounds like there's good use of HR tools at Michael Hill.
We don't always get it right, but we try.
Yeah, look, it's an ongoing and continuing process. And I suppose just to kind of close the loop on this particular slide, I think it is really, really important that organisations create a consistent and informed connection with candidates and employees. I think we're often, we're all often guilty of, doing it some of the time, but not all of the time. So I think it's really, really important that we ensure it's consistent, that consistent connection with candidates and employees.
Mm.
That does bring us to the next topic, which is around the unique challenges of retail hiring. And Lee, you touched on it earlier with, saying that you're going to hire 1,300 staff in 6 weeks. So there's the volume, the seasonality, the turnover that you experience, but also the nature of the casual workforce. And having worked in hospitality, it was very much the same for me there. I guess, like Lee said, you don't always put the effort into these types of staff as you would your head office staff, and that investment is often overlooked for that group. So how do you manage the reputation with your candidates that could also be consumers, but as you said, may not end up in that role, because once they get into it, it is a sales role. It's not just, oh, I love the product.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a really hard one because it works conversely too. If somebody doesn't have a positive experience in one of our stores or online, that then affects our employment brand and our ability to attract good people. So we're certainly, acutely aware of that. We try and do things. We certainly make sure that the messages we're putting to market are aligning with what we're trying to, that CVP versus EVP, or CVP in conjunction with EVP, so that customer value proposition aligns. So certainly cognizant of that and doing a lot of work around that right now. The lens of every applicant is a potential customer. That's something that I talk to my team about a lot, and we keep in the back of my minds, even when we're building our processes, because that experience needs to be a positive one. If it's not, that determines whether they're potentially going to shop with us at a later stage. We try and obviously make that experience a positive one. If they're interviewing, we'll provide feedback to them, either telephone or in person if that's appropriate, rather than a generic email. We try and obviously communicate with all the unsuccessful candidates. We get about 85,000 applications a year for the 1,000 permanent hires and 1,300 casuals that we hire. So, there's a lot of opportunity for things to go wrong. So we certainly keep a close eye on that. But also how our stores are engaging with the candidates as well. We want that to be a positive experience.
Yeah, so I guess regardless of the outcome for them, you really have to see them as advocates of your brand and try and give them as consistent an experience as possible, with the view that they'll walk away saying good things. So,
absolutely. And the challenge, nothing that I'm saying is groundbreaking or new or things that others aren't also doing. But a lot of us aren't always getting it right, I suppose.
Yes, and I suppose as you come into Christmas, leading on to the next question, where you're going to have such a volume, how do you continue with that consistency of experience when there's just the busyness that your team will experience? Good question. I mean, you're right. It's a massive challenge when you're onboarding 1,300 people across 6 weeks in 3 different markets. So we try and obviously standardize what we do. The processes of onboarding are exactly the same, but for some country specific differences. The messages that we're asking our store teams to communicate to the people they're engaging with are consistent. We don't yet onboard them through technology in the same way. So, but that, however, is something that we'll be doing for next year's campaign, so that the experience they get is exactly the same and it's consistent. Because we know that because we've got 300 stores, we've got 300 plus, we've got 300 plus store managers. There's a potential for every engagement that somebody has in each of those stores is different. And not always what we want to portray. So, that's something we're acutely aware of and looking at technology to help us with. So given that you don't use technology today, can you give us some insight as to how you do get those staff up and running once they're hired? Because it is such a speed to launch thing for those Christmas casuals?
Yeah, so once they're into the business, engaged with the business, we run training workshops. So every new Christmas casual will either attend a workshop in person, or they'll have the opportunity to complete online training to cover off their role. So we're very clear on what the role of a Christmas casual is in our business and what they're expected to do. We cover off all of the things around hours, Ross, all of the standard things you would expect. So they receive consistent training, so they get the same messages. So that's our obviously attempt to make sure that the messaging is across the board, is the same across the board. So the training pack for Australia, New Zealand, Canada, but for the regional differences is almost identical because the expectations are the same.
So moving on to the next slide, can you just talk a little bit about how using technology for bulk hiring and the training of those bulk hires will make this a better experience, or you'll be able to execute better on that?
Yeah, so, obviously, Carly, we've been talking to Enboarder for a while, and obviously we're a current customer. So using technology to make sure that experience is consistent in every market. So you remove the element of inconsistency or diluting of your brand messaging or whatever it is in store. And some of our store managers do it, they're awesome at it. And some of them don't do it as well as that, let's say. So we're using technology to make sure that the messaging they get is exactly the same, their expectations are the same, but also to create a passion and an excitement to work in the brand. We don't want them just to come and to join the business and feel like they're making up the numbers or filling a slot. We want them to be engaged positively in that. So we're able to, we're looking at technology to provide messaging prior to them joining, why it's great to work here, what their expectations are, et cetera.
So just on the last topic, and then we'll open it up for the Q&A to everybody. What are some of the things that you do so that these short-term hires go away saying good things? They may return, or they may just be, continue as a consumer, or they, as you said, going to talk to their friends about the experience.
Yeah, it's a challenge, obviously, because there's a lot of people in a lot of our stores, and what messages you want them to walk away with are potentially going to be different depending on who's delivering them. So we want them to feel like they are part of the business. So we don't treat them like you're just a short-term hire. They're engaged to help with our business. We can't do what we need to do at Christmas without them. So, making sure that they know that they feel like they're valued with, in what we're trying to do, because there is a lot of expectation. We make, and anybody who's a retailer involved in retail who's part of this webinar will know, like, Christmas is go time. You got to have, that's where the business makes a significant amount of its money. So you've got to make sure that everybody is clear on what they do. And we need to make sure that those casuals that work for us feel like they're valued and they're contributing to that. So they walk away with the experience that, hey, that was positive and I'd love to come back. And we do get a significant number of our casuals come back and work for us.
And you hit the nail on the head, Lee. It's about experience and the value. And so when we look at using technology and bulk hiring and automation, one of the biggest problems with that is, how do you make it authentic, that experience? So at Enboarder, it's all about connection and engagement. And, there's obviously the process element to that. But I guess in a real ideal world, what does your use of technology look like to keep that alive? Because especially when you're in a domain of retail, it is about face-to-face connection at its heart. Not, obviously, we've got online now, but
yeah.
Do you have a perfect picture of what it would look like when you use these tools?
I don't know there's a perfect picture, or certainly, I've got a view on it with, all our tech is integrated. So, our onboarding systems, the systems we use to bring people into our organization, whether that be reference checking or criminal history checks or whatever the case may be, all of that is integrated so that the experience is a seamless one for the candidate. It's not a hoop jumping exercise. So certainly, that integrated tech is nirvana. The experience of everybody who joins us is consistent. And obviously we're using tech to help us with that. So that the people who are engaging with our business, who are successful in starting with our business, they get the same messages. It's not different by different market. It's not different by the person who's delivering them. It's not a new store manager, an experienced store manager. It's the same messages. Obviously, that relies in some part with on a store manager being involved in that process, and we need them to be. They need to be invested. And we've got to make sure that the view of the employer brand externally matches what it actually is. So, that's the Nirvana, is making sure that the two align.
Okay, I think, Lee, we might move on to the Q&A. Sarah, did you want to know? So we have a couple of questions already. One is that, Lee, you commented on often getting casuals coming back the following year. Do they stay in touch with them throughout the time? Or, how do you do that, I guess?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question, actually, because often we only get the casuals back at Christmas. So what do you do with them the rest of the time, the rest of the year? And I think that's obviously where the question's coming from. So it's sporadic. If I'm really honest, some stores keep in touch with them, with our casuals regularly because they know that they want them back for next year. Some wait until Christmas, the next year. So the Christmas casuals that are engaged with our business now in a particular store, the store manager will follow up with them, just before we start hiring again next year. Not ideal, of course, but sometimes that works. We provide all of our stores, every single store that was open at this time last year, we provide them a list with everybody that they hired last year and contact details so they can reach back. But, and this is another example of technology, we could also start using Enboarder to help us with that. So we just reach out to somebody, hey, how's it going? You're still interested in the opportunity? Let's keep in touch. So hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that question actually came through, do you have a talent pool, and then how do you keep in touch with them throughout the year? And understanding how Enboarder works, you could certainly do that, drop in anybody who raises interest of a position that they would like to join the company with, and, continue to adapt the workflow and send them new news throughout that time. Just keep it the communication lines.
Just on this point, it's a slight diversion to the topic today. We're actually building out a process now to do the same for people on mat leave. Same principle, keep in touch regularly about various things. So we're trying to create an engagement in the business even when you're not in the business.
Yeah, so definitely all about that connection piece, isn't it? So another question that we had was, you must get approached by lots of tech companies wanting to sell you software. How do you find your way through that market?
Yeah, that's true. And recruitment agencies. And no disrespect to recruitment, anybody who's on the webinar today, everybody's got a job to do. I guess for us, it's actually understanding what it is we want our candidates to experience, and then building a process around that. So what do we want the experience to be? What problem are we trying to solve? And then we build the tech and certainly talk to people around that. So, for us, when we engaged with Enboarder originally, it was, how do we solve the challenge of, often in support center roles, somebody gets offered a role and the hiring manager will call them, a month out. Hiring manager will call them on the Friday before to say, hey, we can't wait for you to start Monday, turn up at 9 and ask for Bob. That was a real problem we were trying to solve. And then obviously we partner with Enboarder with regards to Xref, for example. We were manually doing reference checks. So one person in my team was doing all the reference checks from Australia and New Zealand themselves. 80% of their time was spent calling people. We did a trial with Xref. We had a really significantly successful trial where we found that 50% of our references were conducted outside of business hours. It's a retail business that works really well for us. So, understanding what problem you're trying to solve, where does that fit in your employee journey, and then build the tech around that. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, so while we're on recruitment, the recruitment process, we had a question from John. How many touch points does a candidate have with Michael Hill, a full-time candidate, before they're being appointed into a role?
Too many. If I'm honest, we want to make sure that we're getting to the people we want to talk to quickly. We don't want them to feel like they're jumping hoops. So currently it's 10 plus for different things. If I'm being completely honest, but we've already changed it. For example, in an application process, we had a number of questions that when I talked to the recruiters about it, they didn't even look at the answers to the questions. So why are we actually putting that in the application form? So we took out a whole lot of that. John, to answer the question, too many, I would say. But in practical terms, it's over 10 currently.
Okay, so one other question back to sort of the store managers was, how do they respond to the standardization of an onboarding system?
They don't actually know in a lot of cases that it's a standardized onboarding system. So the messages that they get are customized to them. So they're templated, but when you receive them, it doesn't actually seem like they're templated, if that makes sense. So when I've talked to some of our hiring managers, they don't actually realize that it's exactly the same process, for everybody, which says to me that's worked for us.
Great. We don't have any other questions from our audience at the moment. So Lee, is there anything else you'd like to add? And otherwise, Chris, we'll hand it back to you to close.
No, I don't think so, Carly. I think we've covered a lot of ground there, and also conscious of time.
Okay, so sorry, there's one more question from Maria. How do you track and measure employee engagement with current employees?
It's a hot topic of conversation. So we do an annual engagement survey like a lot of organisations do. We're increasingly, not increasingly, we're actually looking to move away from that and do regular pulse checks. Hopefully that answers the question. It's annually currently, but we're looking to move away from that and do far more regular pulse checks.
And I think that's being realised more and more by companies that, annual planning, especially with the technology use today, things change and move too quickly, and we need to be more adaptable and agile in what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So Chris, maybe I'll hand it over to you to close today's session.
Yeah, that'd be great. I suppose just one final question, Lee. We've touched on, I suppose, quite a lot of the stuff that you've implemented from a process and systems perspective at Michael Hill. It's always a kind of an improving and evolving process. What does perfect world look like for you, and what's kind of next on the roadmap if resources and budget take care of themselves?
Yeah, probably to Carly's question there as well, and at the risk of repeating myself, so for us, internally, that integrated tech, so it's easier for us to manage the employee touch points. We don't want them necessarily having to go off to somewhere else to keep continuing the hiring process, if that makes sense. That onboarding experience is consistent. If it doesn't matter if you're being hired in Calgary in Alberta in Canada versus Whakatane in New Zealand, or I don't know, Geraldton in Perth. The experience of a sales professional is, their onboarding experience is the same, but for some specific country differences around what they do in the country, and that employer brand, the sizzle matches the steak, as they say. What you're selling actually aligns to what it's like internally.
Perfect. I really like that. I like that saying to wrap it up. Look, that's pretty much it from our end. I'm, I suppose, kind of speaking on your behalf as well, Carly, but if anyone would like to find out a bit more about how Xref and Enboarder help, we'd certainly love to have a conversation with you guys, and we'll follow up with our contact details via email. I'm just conscious of time. That's a wrap.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Carly. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks, everyone who's joined us. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.